When I started out on my street photography journey, I implemented 5 easy to learn tips which helped me progress and improve as a street photographer and as a night street photographer. So in this tutorial, I'm going to share my tips that you can use to easily elevate your night street photography images and will also take your night street photography to the next level. Let's get into it. Night lights, fishing, no, not that kind of fishing, compositional elements and noise, and some restrained editing techniques all helped me become a better street photographer at night time and also in the day. Let's now get into the detail on these simple techniques so that by the end of the tutorial you will have the knowledge to make your night street photography images even more atmospheric and beautiful. Plus, these tips will help you shoot and edit more efficiently. And let me tell you, if you stick around at the end, I'm going to give you a bonus tip which will separate your night street photography from the similar looking night street photography images that you see all over social media. Streetlights are a night street photographer's best friend. I have said this many times before. Without streetlights, there is no night street photography because lights illuminate everything. The process can be as simple as you want it to be. Wait for somebody or look for subjects to walk under or near a street lamp or other lights, or just wait for them or find them outside on their phone or with a cigarette, or anything else. Either way, you're going to get atmospheric shots. If you want to take a photo of an empty street that is lit by street lamps or shop lights, then this is another great option. One difficulty you might face, it is very easy to clip the highlights of any man-made lights. Therefore, you can either use exposure compensation if you're using aperture priority, or narrow down your aperture if you're using manual mode. And this is so that you can underexpose the image, getting those highlights exposed properly. Then you can increase the shadows in Adobe Lightroom or another editing program if need be. Shop lights and neon light night street photography can also be very atmospheric, as many of these lights are coloured and can add another dimension to your images when the right person walks into the frame. As well as rushing around like a lunatic in the dark looking for subjects to shoot, you can use a technique that has been made famous by photographers such as Henri-Cartier Bresson. I hope I said that right. The fishing technique involves standing in a certain area with the composition framed by you and your camera and waiting for the right subject to enter it, and then you take the shot. The main skill that you must develop when using this technique is patience. There's waiting, and there's waiting, and then there's even more waiting. You have to wait for as long as need be for the right subject to enter the frame. However, quite often you can get lucky and you don't have to wait long at all. Many times I have rocked up to a location and the subject has literally walked down the street into the spot which I was waiting to shoot. But even then, as a person with a physical disability in my arms and hands, holding the camera can be difficult. So if I can do it, then I think anybody can. So if you know of any locations would look great with the right subject walking into the frame, then this would be a great starting point. You do have to put in the research to go out and find interesting compositions, but once you have taken that perfect shot and you upload it to your computer, you will most certainly see that it has all been worthwhile. I find that the fishing technique is a very similar technique to wildlife photographers waiting for the animal to make their moves. A concern for many photographers is having noise in their images. For landscape photography, I get it. This makes a lot of sense. You want that beautiful vista with the sunrise and sunset skies to look beautiful, detailed and clean. Noise would ultimately ruin the beauty of the image. However, With street photography, luminance noise comes with the territory and is just something to respect and forget. Street photographers need to use varying ISOs much of the time, especially when faced with changing light and enclosed street scenarios such as entering alleyways. And this is especially true at night, as the darkness of the evening needs a lot of exposure to take well exposed images. When choosing your ISO for night street photography, you generally want to use an ISO of 800 to 6400. The darker the scene that you are shooting, the higher the ISO will need to be. Therefore, having a wide aperture is a must at night, as well as having a moderately fast shutter speed. Anything from f5.6 to f2.8 is a great aperture for night street photography, and a shutter speed of around 1/80th of a second to around 1/160th of a second is also great for night street photography. Alternatively, you can use Auto ISO, which allows you to set a specific range that you want your ISO to fall within. For example, 800 to 6400. And you can also set a minimum shutter speed. The shutter speed that you set will depend on the minimum shutter speed that you know you can handhold the camera at without camera shake causing the image to be blurred. When shooting night street photography, much of your image is taken up by dark shadows, and if there is any noise in your image, it's usually lurking in the shadows, which somebody who is not photographically trained cannot see. So don't let noise concern you. Unless you're really underexposing your images, then you could well get a lot of horrible colour noise in your shadows. But if you're exposing your photos correctly at night time, with modern cameras these days up to about ISO 6400, you probably won't see too much noise in your photos. My Ricoh cameras have APS-C size sensors, and at 6400 ISO I barely see any noise in my images. However, if you hate the look of noise that much, you can easily get rid of it in Lightroom or Photoshop. Unless it's colour noise, which usually means I have completely underexposed the image, I either completely ignore noise, or some of the time I'm actually adding film grain to give my images a bit of extra character. Just a heads up, please can you give this video a like if you haven't already. It helps me get my content out there to other beginner photographers, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel for other tutorials, photo editing tips and photo walks. If you notice from numerous photos of mine, I make good use of leading lines in my images, which work to add depth and pull the viewer's eye into the image. Adding leading lines to your images is easy to achieve when you are positioned parallel to the road and are facing up or down the road. You can also use light from street lights or shop lights to reveal detail and texture in a surface that wouldn't be so visible during the daytime. Plus, the illumination from street lights creates natural depth in your photos, especially with the contrast between highlights and shadows. And not only leading lines, foreground objects such as tables, walls, or any other man-made or natural stuff that you find on the streets at night also add layers and depth to your photos. Just be careful how you shoot them. You don't want a massive wheelie bin obscuring your subjects. So for foreground elements like that, including fire hydrants and street posts, I would only implement them subtly and put them towards the bottom corner of the frame. Night photography is what it says on the tin. It's supposed to be dark. Add a preset or give your image a specific look by all means. But in terms of lighting, a simple play with the highlights and shadows slider is all that you need, and maybe use the tone curve for a bit of contrast punch or to take away a bit of contrast. In my opinion, the worst thing you can do with night street photography is to create an HDR image, which would mean cranking up the shadows and thrusting down the highlights. When I was first starting out with landscape photography, this was my editing style of choice, until I became more experienced and realised that natural looks best. However, if you love the HDR look, or you have your own style of editing, then by all means go for it. This is just the way I like to do things. Let it be said, I would never leave home without one of these. If you want to make streetlights and shop lights glow even more atmospherically, then buy a 1/4 Pro Mist filter for your lens. Every time I bring my photos into Lightroom, when having one of these on my lens, I'm always blown away by how cool and atmospheric the street and shop lights look in my images due to one of these guys. I don't take it off the camera anymore. They are relatively inexpensive, and I always purchase a very cheap lens cap that goes on top of my Ricoh GR camera's lenses to protect them. They also help to reduce highlights, which is why I rarely need to underexpose the shot using exposure compensation anymore. Anyway, that's going to do it, guys. If you made it this far, then thank you for watching. Now watch this video here to see me in action with my Ricoh GR3X and the Pro Mist filter in this unbelievably beautiful town called Brighton. Go forth and create.